Welcome to the Muller UN seminar. Today you will watch the flipped activities for week 4. The topics I chose to cover this week are related to what we discussed in class. So the first topic I'd like to discuss is measuring development on a global scale. The number 2 topic will be need or want, thinking in terms of system. Last week, some of you watched the video for gross national happiness, and others read the website dedicated to inclusive wealth. I believe we came to a conclusion that even though happiness is important, money matters too. And I believe also that we agreed that it is how wealth is measured that is a problem. So we mentioned 2 aspects that should be considered when measuring wealth, when measuring money. And the first one was cost of living, and the second one, wealth distribution. So let's have a closer look at the cost of living. First, I will do it within the same country, and I will look at the situation in the US and the situation in India so that we have an example for a developed country and for a actually newly industrialized country, yet another way to classify a country. For the cost of living in the US, I chose 2 states that I am familiar with, namely Washington State and California. To compare the cost of living between Washington State and the city of Vancouver and California, Orange County, I used CNN Money. As you can see, if right now you live in Vancouver, Washington State, and you make $50,000 a year, well, it wouldn't be quite enough to live in Orange County. For the same standard of living, you would need to make almost $72,000. Why the difference? Well, if we look here, we can see that yes, groceries are more expensive, transportation is also more expensive, but the biggest difference is housing. 149% more, and utilities 33%. So within the same country but in different states, you can see that the cost of living is quite different. Regarding the cost of living, depending on the size of the city, I chose to look at the situation in India, and the 2 cities I chose are Dharamshala and Delhi. So in this situation, the small city would be Dharamshala, and as you can imagine, the big city, Delhi. I give the specific reference of this slide at the end of the second video, and I just wanted to point out that the prices that you see here are in Japanese yen, and that the information gathered by residents, so it's people who live in the cities. So for Dharamshala, the information was gathered in 2014, and for Delhi in 2015. So looking at restaurant, a meal in an inexpensive restaurant is the same in Dharamshala and Delhi. And this is actually something I did notice while eating in the 2 cities. But as soon as you go on a higher quality level, well, definitely you can see the difference, right? 100% more expensive, so double the price in Delhi. In terms of drinks, soda is clearly more expensive in Delhi, which kind of surprises me because I would have thought that with the distance that the drinks have to travel, that they would be actually more expensive in Dharamshala. As for water in a restaurant, the price is the same. Now let's look at the market, which in our context, Japanese context, is the same as a grocery store. So milk, bread, and rice are more expensive in Delhi, but maybe fresher product would be such as cheese, tomatoes, and potatoes are actually cheaper in Delhi. And this I can easily explain with what I was saying regarding transportation for soda. Around Dharamshala, it is not easy to grow so many vegetables, so they are probably coming from further away. Whereas Delhi is, I'm guessing, surrounded by farms that would produce the vegetables used in the city. But if we look at the difference, this is less expensive on a smaller percentage, whereas when it's more expensive, it's on a much bigger percentage. So yes, life in Delhi is more expensive. And this is very clear when you look at the price of rent. It's unbelievably more expensive when it's in the city center, and still a lot more expensive when it is outside of the city center. Now, the fact that transportation in Delhi is a lot cheaper compared to Dharamshala makes total sense. In Dharamshala, there is basically a bus system that is quite sketchy and very, very tough to take, whereas in Delhi, they have a subway as well as buses. So the fact that transportation is cheaper in Delhi makes total sense. If you look at the price of a taxi, though, when it comes to more private means of transportation, then you see again that Delhi is much more expensive. Thankfully, if we look at salaries, we see that people living in Delhi do get a much higher salary compared to people living in Dharamshala, so that they can hopefully afford the more expensive cost of living of Delhi. As a conclusion, I can say that the cost of living within the same country, be it in a developed country like the US or a newly industrialized country like India, the cost of living is quite different depending on the state or on the size of the city. On the worldwide level, we will obviously find similar differences. So New York serves as the reference. So New York is considered index 100, and then you can compare other cities. London comes very close, with then Sydney and Tokyo, and then Prague, Berlin in Europe, and Beijing, so China, India, and Brazil. So yes, again, the cost of living is widely different when you look at the whole world. As a partial conclusion, then, I can say that measuring development on a global scale using the cost of living would not be a simple task. How about wealth distribution? We'll look at what's happening worldwide and then within the 27 top countries. Looking at the data gathered by Credit Suisse Global Wealth Databook 2013, we can see that on the worldwide level, wealth is not very balanced. Meaning that if we look at this, so the percentage of world population and the percentage of the total wealth, we see that more than half, almost 69% of the population only owns 3% of the total wealth. That says a lot about being balanced, being equitable. Next, we see that almost 23% of the population then owns 13.7% of the total wealth. And then this is probably where everybody's going to be jumping. 7.7% owns 42.3%, and then only a 0.7% owns 41%. So more than 80% of the total wealth in the world is owned by a little more than 8% of the population. So yes, wealth is not equitably distributed. What about wealth distribution within the same country? So I am using still the Credit Suisse data, and I decided to focus on the 27 top countries for the median wealth per adult. And yes, the data is still 2013. The type of wealth measured here is called the individual net worth. So the individual net worth represents the value of financial assets. So financial assets, it's the money, right? More a paper thing. So for instance, the money in the stock market, people may invest money in the stock market, so that would be part of their financial assets. Some of us have life insurance, so this is also an asset in case something happens to us. Our relatives will get money, so this is considered as an asset, a financial asset. And as you can see, pension entitlements. So as you work, you gather right to having money when you retire. So this is also calculated as the financial assets. In addition to the financial assets, you have the non-financial assets, and this is housing, so the houses you own, as well as the land. So then you need to remove debts, which represent all the money you owe to a bank or individuals. First, let me say that I stopped at 27 because I wanted to include the USA in the table. Now let's focus a little bit on this, right? The mean wealth per adult and the median wealth per adult. And I've highlighted a couple countries that we can all understand. So we've got Australia, France, Japan, and yes, further down we have the US. So we see that there is a wide difference between the mean and the median, and I'd like to explain why there is such a big difference between a mean and a median. The mean is another way to say average, right? So I think you all know how to calculate an average. You add all the numbers, so all the money people are making, and then you divide by the total number of, in this case, adults. Well, the median is not just a sum, it's actually looking at the frequency distribution. And the other important point is it's observed values, right? So let me explain the importance of midpoint of frequency distribution and observed value. The reason why I like the median better than the mean is that I understand it better. So the mean means that there is an equal number of values below and above the median value. So let's say that in Australia, the median wealth for adults is about $220,000 US. Well, I understand that there are an equal number of people above 220,000 and below 220,000, which is something that I don't know when you use the mean or average. The other reason why I like the median better than the mean is because of the observed value. Observed value means that a number is actually found in real life. And yes, I did put real because how real is a number? That's a big question. So let's say that in Australia, someone is actually making that amount of money. On the other hand, with the mean or average, the value might not correspond to anything real. I realize this is not a math class, but I thought I would share with you the feeling I had when I understood how to calculate a median. The feeling was, yes, this is it. This is a much better way to look at a series of numbers, a much better way compared to the mean or average. So let's say you have the following numbers. Well, the first thing you need to do is to put the numbers in order from lower to higher. So here we would have 10, 11, 13, 15, 16, 23, and 26. Then you need to find the middle number. As far as I'm concerned, when I don't have to use Excel actually to do it, I can do it by hand. I'll go from the outside. So 10 and 26, 11, 23, 13, 16, and then we have the middle number, which is 15, and the middle number being the median. Now, what would the mean be? Well, you just add all the numbers, and that gives you 114, and you divide it by 7, and the result is 16.29. As I said before, 16.29 is actually not an observed value. What if you have two middle numbers, right? So we've got a similar series up here, but I added 20. So again, just put the numbers in order from lower to higher. So 10, 11, 13, 15, 16, 20, 23, 26. And then find the middle numbers this time. So again, if we go from the back, it's 10, 26, 11, 23, 13, 20. And we have two middle numbers, 15 and 16. Then, yes, the mean kicks in, but here it's to calculate the mean of the two middle numbers. So you add 15 to 16 and then you divide by 2 and you get 15.5. Let me repeat that number, 15.5. So yes, this is actually not a value that we actually observe in the data, but still, if you look at what the mean would be, well, you still can see that it's closer to an observed value than the mean. So yes, the mean would be 16.75. I hope that in the future you will pay attention to the numbers that you're given and look at whether it's a mean or a median, and if you see mean, you know that it's probably very far from the truth, again in air quotation mark. So moving away from the mean and the median and looking at the distribution of wealth for the percentage of adults, and they have 4 different ranges under 10,000, from 10,000 to 100,000, 100,000 to 1 million, and over 1 million. And yes, this is something you mentioned in class. Wealth is not equally distributed, right? Australia has a rather high level of wealth for the majority of the population, but still we see 30% with less than $100,000 US. France, surprisingly, has also quite high number of people with 100,000 to 1 million US dollars. To be honest, this feels not so right, actually, from my own experience, but hey, maybe numbers are better than my own judgment in this case, and kind of an equal divide between under 10,000 and from 10,000 to 100,000. Japan is again pretty similar to France when it comes to 100,000 to 1 million, but quite different for the lower two. And the US I really thought it wouldn't be so well split between under 10,000, 10,000 to 100,000 and 100,000 to 1,000,000, but it still is. This is, I guess, the image that a lot of people have about the US. But again, this shows that wealth is not equally distributed among people, right? What we would want to have is maybe, let's say, being idealistic, having 100% of people right there. No, some people have a lot of assets, I would say on this side. Some people have some assets and some people have very little assets. So regarding wealth distribution, we see that there is no country with all its citizens at the same level. Even a country whose ideology was to have all citizens at the same level doesn't quite work, even though, and the country is China, even though it's very sad to see that a lot of them, more than 50% have under 10,000, and then the next range is 39.1%, and then over that it becomes really small. So sadly we see that China has still a very low level of personal assets. And on top of it, as we saw before, no country is exactly similar to another one. France and Japan are similar for the higher level range, but not for the lower level ones. That is why I claim that measuring development on a global scale through money is almost impossible. We looked at the cost of living and we saw that there are important variations within the same country, whether the country is developed or newly developed, and between countries. In terms of financial resources or personal assets, also it's very different within the same country and between countries. Because of these differences, because of these variations, it becomes really hard to say something that would hold true for everybody, right? Something that would hold true for, let's say, the higher level people in Australia or France will not work for the lower level people in Australia. Or if we start comparing countries, we might say, oh, Japan and France are similar, but for a specific range. So what about the other people? So trying to measure development on a global scale is definitely challenging. In the first video, we considered measuring development on a global scale and realized that if we look at the money side, it is a very challenging task. In this video, I'd like us to think about need and want and how we can resolve the issue if we think in terms of systems.